Have you guys read anything on muscle recovery and how long it takes for a muscle to fully recover from high intensity exercise? I've only found one good study with the muscle of the biceps after 4 days of training. That's a good question. So we're assuming that muscle recovery in this instance is muscle protein synthesis. We can also assume it's the relaxation or the release of oxidative damage from the muscle fiber tissues. Are there byproducts that are produced which are going down in kind of like a trend fashion because you're more recovered over time? Is it measured in the strength that someone is able to perform from day 1 versus day 4 of training? So yeah, I'd have to look at that study myself, and perhaps Jerome has looked at it already. But all I say for my main point based on this question is, are you able to train maximally after 4 days of rest? So you could, in theory, train biceps on day 1, then again on day 4 or 5. If your training is very hard, then it'll be unlikely that you'll be able to match your training intensity, your effort, your strength level from the first day. That's not to say it can't be done, but it becomes more challenging if you're training very hard, especially when it comes to the context of the question, which is high intensity exercise. So what do you think, Drew?
I think it's going to be one of those things that is going to be so highly individualized based on the person that we're talking about. Some people recover very, very quickly from exercise and have a tolerance for a high volume of exercise. So I'm reminded of John Little, the guy that co-wrote Body by Science, has a bod pod in his gym called Nautilus North up in Canada. And the bod pod is a extremely accurate way of measuring body composition. So in having his own unit, he was able to take people that went to his gym and trained and test their body composition and asking them to reduce their food intake. And then he manipulated the volume and frequency of the exercise while measuring body composition. So one of the key points from him with his cohort is he started everybody off on just 5 exercises once a week. And most people did really, really well with that and were able to lose body fat and gain muscle at the same time. But to get up to like 98%, 99% of the people that went to his gym to continue to lose fat and build muscle at the same time, some people had to have their frequency reduced down to only 2 total sets once a week. I have a client whose anecdotes I've pointed out before. His name was Matt. He lost 50 pounds in 6 months. We started 3 days a week, but as he got stronger, I had to cut back on the volume and frequency. And at the end of our time together, he was only exercising once with 6 total sets of workout every 10 to 14 days. So yeah, muscle protein synthesis as just that one single measure will return back to baseline levels. So you exercise, it goes up, and then it'll go back down to baseline after about 24, well, in some individuals, 24 hours, but most people, 48 to 72 hours, 2 to 3 days, it'll get back to baseline. But a lot of that's going to depend on your genetics. Diet can have some influence, and also the volume and frequency that you're doing with your high intensity training. It's going to be so individualized that, I'm a little remiss to try and give some general recommendations for people. As a starting point, full body workout 3 days a week is usually enough time to recover. But then depending on how somebody's making progress or not making progress, then you manipulate the volume and the frequency. So initially, I tend to think it recovers for people a lot faster because the magnitude of the stress from the exercise isn't as big as it will be 6 months or a year down the road when you get stronger. If you can only lift 50 pounds overhead when you first start exercising, that's not as big of a stress as a year or two down the road when you're lifting 200 pounds overhead. And it stands to reason that as you get stronger, the physical stress becomes bigger. And because the physical stress is bigger, it takes more time to recover from. So unfortunately, there's some fluidity in this answer. Depending on where you are, it'll be fully recovered when it's fully recovered. Like could be 1 or 2 days. It could be 7 to 10 to 15 plus days.
Yeah, very well said. Do you think that there's an element of neural adaptation? I think you kind of alluded to it. So it might be that your muscle fibers seem repaired to 90% perhaps after 4 days. However, is it that after 4 days you've still got that neural fatigue, especially as you become more advanced? So the 100 kilogram shoulder press that I do versus the 100 kilogram shoulder press that I did a year ago, now it might be easier because I've adapted my neural pathways. Whereas for a beginner lifting 50 kilograms versus me being lifting 50, the adaptation would be more tricky because the person has only just lifted that weight versus someone who's more experienced.
Yep. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Strength corresponds very well to hypertrophy, but there's more that causes strength than just hypertrophy alone. So in general, if you're getting stronger, it's a pretty good indication for the most part that you're probably building some degree of muscle. But to see things from the other point of view with kind of neuromuscular adaptations, it would be possible for a lot of people to train the same muscle group every single day and to continue to see strength improvements for some period of time, not necessarily because the muscle is getting bigger, but you're just becoming more efficient at that pathway. So size and strength will correlate really, really well for the most part, but that's one of a number of measures that you kind of use to try and figure out if you feel like you're recovered for that next workout.
Very well said. Thanks for your answer to that. And yeah, he just said 90%. So yeah,
Gotcha.
Cool stuff. Great to hear this reviewed in detail. Yes, ask good questions. You'll get our best answers. Very good. You'll get two of us as well. Two people, not one.
Yeah.
I think we should do what Bart does and have like 20 people on the panel.
That could be fun.
Apparently, if the new StreamYard thing, I can host up to, I think it's 10 people.
Oh, we'll have to try that sometime.
I'm terrified. It'll be too exhausting and I'll get nervous.
You can always kick
get too
people.
Shy. I can. I was about to do it. Yeah, I could do it right now. Let's do. No, I'll leave it.
See you guys. Okay.
I'll leave
it. I can take a hint. I know when I'm not wanted anymore.
All right. Yeah, Andrew said, thank you guys. This was very helpful, especially for someone like me who's trying to perform one set of failure per exercise. That's probably in some exercises like leg press to reach failure in one attempt. Yes, Jerome and I will both agree with certainty. Over our training careers, there's been very little instances where we've been able to train to failure on a difficult leg exercise. We can do it on perhaps leg extensions, leg curls, calves, adductors, abductors maybe, but anything really tricky where it's going to be hard to rack, there's a weight on you which could squash you. Very few times I've been able to train to eccentric failure, at least doing that kind of methodology.
Yeah. There's a gentleman named Daniel Thompson that runs a channel called Exercise Thoughts and Discussions. And he has a video where he talks about his entire life, and he's super slow guild certified. I think he's worked for Arthur Jones, or at least he's met Arthur a couple of times. And having trained in high intensity training fashion for, I believe, over 30 years now, I think he says he's only really hit muscular failure maybe like 2 or 3 times out of 30 years. So even the word failure is, Jonathan knows I don't like that word. We need to come up with better terminology, but I get how it's used conventionally. Push your sets as hard as you safely can. And if you feel like you have more in the tank, do a second, do a third, do a fourth set until you just feel like there's nothing in the tank, without compromising safety. And then just see how your body responds. And as you're able to do that over a period of time, you'll be able to generate more intensity, and then you'll have to dial the volume back in general. So don't get too legalistic and feeling locked in that you're only going to do one set of leg presses or one set of one exercise. I think one set is enough if you can generate enough intensity, but like I said, if you feel like you just couldn't get enough out of that set, do a second set, do a third set.
I completely agree. Yeah, so with all this said, guys, what we're basically saying is I have a really, really messed up spine, as I always talk about, but it gives you guys a point of view, some context to what Jerome's saying. My right hip is also really, really messed up. It really hurts sometimes to walk and move. Saying that, I can do some workouts quite safely for legs if I do pre-exhaust movements. If I find ways to make the compound, the heavy, the hip intensive movements have less weight, basically. So pre-exhaust if you can. The leg press as well is a very good example of that, like Jerome said. So you can do one set and say, for example, you find out that you can get to concentric failure with 100 kilos. Okay, so you know that's like your hard spot where you don't really want to go beyond that if you've got like bad hips or thighs, whatever it is, bad knees. Then you might say, okay, well, I'm not going to do 100 kilos, but I'm going to do 90 or 95. 95 probably a good amount. We might say, okay, rather than do the 10 repetitions of 100 kilos, I might do 9 repetitions. But then you're still aiming to increase that amount, but with the relative difficulty or the rate of exertion isn't 100%, so you're not getting that complete 10 reps out, in which case you can add in a second set, a third set. So a lot of these, you guys have all seen the studies where there's like, one set gave you 60% gains, 2 sets 80%, 3 sets maybe 90%, or whatever it happens to be, somewhere around that ballpark figure. If you take that first set to total failure, where the weight squashes you, that is 100% intensity. That is 100% muscle growth you can get for one set. But there's a safety element that you don't have in that set. So you might just do concentric muscular failure. Mm-hmm. So you can essentially get maybe 90% of the gains with one set, theoretically. But then most people, as we know, do not train that hard. So they might only get 60%, in which case they'll have to, by default, add in a second or a third set to get the rest of the muscle gains that they might be able to accrue from the total workout itself.
Mm-hmm. Yep, well said.